Welcome back to the Dean's Forum, everyone. Glad to have a fabulous panel today. We're going to be talking about the Kendeda building, which I would argue is the most sustainable building on any campus in this country, at least, and maybe in the world. We've got a great panel. We have Michael Gamble, a professor at the School of Architecture, Georgia Tech. We have Josh Gashman, who's with Lord Atkins Sargent, a Katerra company. We have Howard Wertheimer, who is with Piedmont Park, but is the former campus architect for Georgia Tech. We have John DeConje, who's with facilities at Georgia Tech, and Jimmy Mitchell with Skanska. Josh, would you describe for us what is the Living Building Challenge? This is a living building. What does that mean?
So the Living Building Challenge is a program created by the International Living Future Institute. It's similar to LEED and other what I affectionately like to call third-party sustainability measuring sticks. So it's a third-party certification program that checks in on the data and confirms that design, construction, and owner teams have done what they say they've done. But what differentiates the Living Building Challenge from all of the other ones out there is it requires a couple of things that are quite different. So one, it is actually a philosophy. It's an approach. It's a way to start to think about the world and buildings and the built environment in a different manner. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that in the coming minutes. It's also an advocacy tool. Part of the program is to make sure that the requirements are so rigorous that meeting them is virtually let's just say it's super challenging, and as a consequence, part of the program is to advocate for the change that you want to see, even if you can't necessarily actually get that change during the construction of a particular building. And then third of all, the thing that really sets it apart is it is based on performance and actual real life post-occupancy data. And so you cannot become a living building simply by building the building. You need to build it, you need to operate it and live in it occupied for at least 12 months so that you can prove that certain data points like net positive energy and net positive water did in fact occur during real life conditions after the building was built.
So Howard, would you tell us, what are the goals of the Kendeda building for innovative, sustainable design at Georgia Tech?
So there are several goals associated with this opportunity that we had. Georgia Tech has been on this sustainable campus development journey for quite some time. In 2007, when Wayne Clough was president, he signed the American College and University President's Climate Commitment, which really put a line in the sand about Georgia Tech's commitment to sustainable design and the built environment. Since that time, we have over 20 LEED certified buildings. The last 5 are LEED Platinum buildings, including the Kendeda building. And, pursuing the Living Building Challenge, the Kendeda Fund approached Georgia Tech to really help transform the building industry and design industry in the Southeast. And, we had an opportunity to work with them very closely in this investment. But the other part is also the green infrastructure that we've invested in on the campus. So how do we continue to transform what we're doing on the Georgia Tech campus? One example of that is we installed over 3 million gallons of cistern capacity that captures water, diverts it from Atlanta's combined sewer system, and then that water is harvested and used to flush toilets in new buildings and irrigate our landscape. So the living building was sort of the next progression of that, and we've taken it to a whole new level.
What are the key design features and innovative systems in the Kendeda building?
The things that we really wanted to do when we started looking at the Kendeda building, understanding that the goal of net positive energy, meaning that in any given year, the project needs to generate more energy than it uses, we really needed to approach what it meant to condition a building in a hot, humid climate quite differently. And so our process started with understanding why we were conditioning the building in the first place. And that has to do with making people comfortable. our goal was not to hit a certain metric in terms of either temperature or humidity, but rather to understand what keeps people comfortable and then to make sure the building provided that environment and the range of options that allowed that to happen. So that then meant that we could start to think about bigger picture things. The biggest move we probably made in terms of performance was to make sure that our envelope was extremely robust. And so by doing that, most of the energy in cities like Atlanta and throughout similar climates throughout the world, most energy to condition buildings is actually spent to dehumidify them, not so much to cool them. So by having a very robust envelope, we ensure a minimum amount of water vapor can infiltrate the building. And just by doing that, you reduce the load on the building. Then you can start to understand how else you can keep people comfortable. Things like air movement. And so for folks that have been in the building, or if you haven't had a chance to tour it, please, I'd encourage people to go tour it, both virtually and in person. But there are ceiling fans throughout, and so that gives air movement and allows people to be more comfortable that way. Mean radiant temperature is another important aspect of keeping people comfortable. And so most of the heating and cooling in the building is actually accomplished by heating or cooling the floors, depending on winter or summer, and then that heat radiates either to you or from you to keep you more comfortable in that way. And so the traditional ductwork that is in the building is exclusively for ventilation and dehumidification to really encourage that to lower energy use through that process. Of course, then we have a major system on the roof, which is hard to miss when you approach the building, which is a photovoltaic panel, and that series of panels, that array, not only does it generate energy for the building, it also is a water collector, and so that's the other side of performance that we could talk a little bit more about in terms of how the project manages water. We're collecting water off of those solar panels into the roof, into a cistern, treating it and drinking it. So we're doing rainwater to potable, which is a significant step forward in reducing potable water use. All of the water that falls during a storm is treated on the site and infiltrated back into the ground. And to build on what Howard was discussing at a campus level, to reduce the stormwater runoff into the combined sewer system, we are holding that water on site and infiltrating it to rebuild groundwater and not allowing it to affect communities that are downstream. In addition to that, we have composting toilets, so we have no black water generation, and we're treating all of our gray water, things that water that comes out of the sinks and showers on site, and then infiltrating that water as well.
One other thing to consider in the building is the way in which performance means two different things. So Josh was talking about the technical building performance, which is a key part of the Living Building Challenge. But there's also another type of performance that we're interested in, and that has to do with interaction of people in the space. So a couple of things that we could point out, the Living Building has a gigantic porch. We enjoyed a nice lunch on it the other day. It faces the Eco Commons. It's sort of an intangible value, creating social spaces. For those of you who visit, you'll notice that universal access is a big part of the performance of the building. So instead of demurring on the handicap ramp, for example, or universal access ramp, it's in the center of the building. And one other point related to performance, everybody should be interested to know, we call it a non-denominational building, meaning that not one college owns it. And it's meant to be a place where everybody from a variety of disciplines on and off campus, industry, community, and academic partners can meet to discuss how to move the needle on some of these key policy challenges ahead of us related to climate change.
So this was kind of a unique project that we actually had a number of teams in a design competition before we picked Josh's firm, Lordak and Sargent and Miller Hull, to do the building. Howard, could you describe that design competition and sort of how that worked out?
Sure. So we actually called it an ideas competition, not a design competition, because we had never done a living building before. So what we did, we shortlisted 3 excellent design teams, all of whom had members on their team who have done a living building. It could have been the architect or the landscape architect or both. And it was a rigorous process. over several months where we conducted workshops in the offices of the design teams. One full day in January of 2016, I believe, and then once in February. And John Ducange can talk a little bit about that because he managed the process. But we did not ask questions. We did not answer questions. We just observed how the teams worked. And their site was 8 acres, so they can place the building. So we developed the program for the building, roughly around 40,000 square feet. And we did not dictate where the building should be sited. We had some sector plan work that we had done internally on the campus and some master planning work. And what was interesting about the ideas competition and the final interviews, which were in that March, all 3 teams had identified this corner of the site at First Drive and State Street as one of their site options. And ideally in the South, and Josh talked about the front porch, typically you don't orient front porches in the South towards the west. But that was a very deliberate move, and they actually had 2 schemes, one facing south and one facing west. But we felt the Eco Commons, the porch needed to open up to the Eco Commons. But so that's how the building got oriented. I will also mention, and Michael was a part of this, that the School of Architecture was doing a studio on the Living Building Challenge. And throughout that journey for that semester, the students, I think there were about 50 students, they all got to sit in and observe these workshops in the offices of the design firms. And they all got to observe the final interviews with our Planning and Design Commission, which I know when I was an architecture student, I never had that type of opportunity. So it was fairly unique that here were these students that, in essence, they were the client, and they were in meetings with the CEOs and lead design professionals of these world-class design firms.
It's just what you would imagine. We had a bunch of graduate students in our professional degree program, and not only did they have the opportunity to sit in on the discussions about these different ideas related to the development of the total Eco Commons, with the Kendeda building as sort of one of the featured projects, but they also performed a very similar exercise in the design studio. So that essentially was part of the program that we developed for the entire semester. Awesome opportunity. And John, I would love for you to comment on this because you did a wonderful job organizing it in your very calm, cool, collected way always. It was just such a great experience. And for those of you watching, John's also an architect, so he comes into this with a lot of experience managing projects.
Thank you, Michael. So yes, it was quite an experience for all of us. I think we all learned a lot, and I think that was one of the major goals of this, was to understand, all the different ideas and that we were going to hear. But we saw such a spectrum of ideas across the board from the 3 different groups, and it served an educational purpose for the students, but also for us to understand and to learn what the Living Building Challenge was about. We really didn't have any, previous experience and knowledge of the Living Building Challenge. And this was an educational opportunity for all of us. Getting into the details, and, Howard alluded to this, we were observers, which my biggest challenge as the manager was keeping all of our people quiet during those discussions, because our tendency is to want to engage and ask questions and collaborate. But we were basically flies on the wall during this process. And, we had to stay quiet in order to keep it fair to all of the different teams and not give any input. But we were observing their chemistry, their collaboration, all of those, some of those intangible qualities about how their team interacted. And it helped us to make what I think was a great decision in selecting the team that we selected with the LAS Miller Hall team. And I will say that at the last touch point that we had, I remember the idea, what we ultimately have come to see as a living building, as the Candida building, gelled at the last touch point, and we saw it in the morning, and it was an all-day kind of an exercise for us to go through these touch points. But we saw it for the first time in the morning, and then we broke for lunch. And during that lunch period, we started talking about how fabulous that design was, that concept was. And it really engaged us in a way that, we thought this was it. This is what we wanted to see. And if you look at the building today versus the rendering that we saw in the competition, it's really very similar. We really didn't change it very much, which is a tribute to the team and how thoughtful it was, and how much effort they put into really figuring this out early on during the competition. So it was quite an experience. We learned a lot. The students learned a lot, I believe, from seeing, some of the greatest architects in our area putting forth these ideas, and it was a great experience. So I enjoyed it.
One of the things that I really have been impressed with was the use of reclaimed and recycled materials in the building. Would someone comment about what the makeup, how much reclaimed material and what kinds of recycled material we used in the building?
Well, Steve, I'll get us started from the design perspective, and then I'll pass it to Jimmy to elaborate on some of the stories, because I will say, first off, when you look at reclaimed materials, use of reclaimed and high content of recycled materials does not happen without the buy-in and the partnership of the folks actually building the building. And so it was really important that Skanska was there to help make sure that the things that we generated conceptually together were actually executed. But part of it was about bringing history and place and a certain uniqueness of material to the building. And so you see that in, for example, the use of the Tech Tower treads for the main monumental stair. Those were joists that were pulled out of Tech Tower when a new stairwell needed to be installed. Georgia Tech had the foresight to save those, and so we were able to reuse them. Similarly, trees that had been taken down on campus were saved, and so it allowed our team to have access to these logs. So we could then say, okay, we want to mill them in this way, and we like to reuse them in this way, and then use them as focal points and accent points throughout the building to really show what wood is, where wood comes from, and what it looked like maybe before it's super processed. And so that's part of why we've got a number of live edges trying to show the size of the logs and where they came from. So you start to see that expressed in some of the reuse of that material. The big story in this field is also the reuse of 2x4s in the nail laminated timber decking, and I'll let Jimmy talk a little bit more about that.
It was really fun experience early on in the design process. We kicked things off after this ideas competition with a biophilia charrette, and a lot of that started with the mind frame that we all threw our titles away, and so I think at times, Joshua would play contractor engineer, and at times I would come up with some interesting ideas as well. So with this salvage and some other elements, you don't really want to, as a contractor, we want to build the vision of the design team. And so you don't really want salvage items to dictate what happens. So, but really at this concept to schematic phase is the opportunity to see where that design is and find salvage opportunities. And so we basically, as a team, went out into the community right at that time and found out that, what was available. And you just had these wonderful moments. You'd go to another building that was being demolished, and you would take some snapshots and circulate it around. The design team would look at it and see if there's some elements that might work, and then they would communicate that idea back to us, and we would see if we could build it or not through that vision. And then also there would be these great things in our process. We have, Living Building Challenge projects have a materials conservation waste management plan, and that waste management plan is at the design phase, the construction phase, and the operations phase. So The author of the design team does things like, choose materials that don't waste. Our processes don't waste, and then Georgia Tech hopefully will not waste in their operations. So we discovered things like when we as Joshua mentioned, these salvage 2x4s, we self-performed our NLT panels, which were structural 2x6s sandwiched with spacers that were salvaged 2x4s, repeated all the way throughout. So when you visit the building, it's just you look up and you see it. It's beautiful. Some other great stories. The Alumni Association had a slate tile roof that needed to come down because it was leaking. The flashing had given away, but the tile was still great. We salvaged all the tile off that roof and incorporated it into the wall tile in the bathrooms. And I think that 2x4 salvage came from Life Cycle Building Center. We had a great partnership with local warehouse salvage material nonprofit Life Cycle Building Center, and they collected primarily 2x4s from movie sets that had been when they're done filming, they strike the set, and that material we captured it. It was the movie Rampage and the show 24 were two of the sets that we got our material from, and then Georgia Tech has this Grinnell warehouse that we were able to utilize right at the edge of campus, and we actually set that warehouse up as our manufacturing site to build all these 10.5 foot by 6 foot panels. We made 488 of them. And incorporate that salvage material into there. So, ultimately, if you go back and you look at the weight of material that we incorporated as salvage into the building, it exceeded the weight of material that we threw away at the landfill, which best describes that net positive waste.
Well, I'll start it out. I think from an owner's perspective, budget and schedule are always our big issues. And, we were working on the design and getting estimates along the way and found that we were, having challenges meeting the budget. And we hit a period in the construction cycle when we were on the upswing in terms of inflation. So, we ended up going back to the boards and the design team did a good job of trying to squeeze a little bit out of the building, make it a little bit smaller. And by the time we did that, got it priced again, and it was at the same spot. So, so we had to hurry up and get this, get this under contract. And we worked with Skanska to identify ways to do that. We ended up getting that done. We had to, be creative about it, but also look at opportunities to add things back in. But at the end of the day, that was one of the biggest challenges, was getting within budget. But we did it successfully, and at the end of the day, we really, don't feel like we compromised. It works well. So that was probably, from an owner's perspective, one of the biggest challenges.
A couple of points. One is that, on the value management side, it wasn't just about price as well, which of course we had to overcome those challenges. It was really fun having the currency be the 20 imperatives. And, when we got down to it, if there was an element or an idea that was rotate a room to make this space program a little bit tighter and have less wasted space or whatnot, we would there'd be this cost part of it, but it was okay, it's going to positively impact 5 imperatives. Whatever you do, there's always a negative as well. It's going to negatively impact 2 of them, and in concert we would have this great analysis about the imperatives, and if these ideas didn't positively impact 4 or 5 of the imperatives, it just didn't make it in. And so that was really kind of a fun part of the process, in addition to just cost. So 2 of the things as a contractor, one is when we actually were at the site phase and the structure phase, we had the second wettest year on record at that moment, which I'm a little bit proud of, because if you go in there and you walk in the building today, the wood is just gorgeous. and you wouldn't necessarily realize it was raining on it the whole time we were building it. And then the second thing, which I think is a tip of the hat to the entire market, one of the big health things is the red list. And the amount of research that we had to do for every single material in the building was unbelievable. And the majority of that research happened at the manufacturer level. And so it was just a lot. It was just a huge amount of paperwork and documentation. And the committee that we put together to do the materials, to review that documentation and set the team on the right course for all these manufacturers to do the due diligence that we all needed to do, really, I think, was the hardest part of it. And one thing I like about that is when we have a living building challenge that is complete, that the market in the area around these projects has now experienced the difficulty of the red list. And similar to 15 years ago when we didn't know what low VOCs were, kind of today, a little while ago, the market didn't know what the red list was. Well, today, when we look at VOCs, you can go to get a can of paint and use an app on your phone to see how the VOC content. Hopefully, pretty soon, because of projects like Candida, the red list will be behind us. And it was great to see some things like, for example, the initial design, we had of a curtain wall. It kind of wanted to be a German manufacturer. And because they had a declared product that was red list free, but by the end of our project, we had an American manufacturer that was Conair with a declared product. So we were able to, this project also, it was able to kind of expand the options for what is acceptable for the challenge, which is, I think, a really great part of the work that we did as a design and construction team, as well as expanded the list of materials, in particular in the Southeast.
Let me thank everyone. This has been a great conversation. The Candida building is, I think, an important, not just artifact, but an important idea. It shows Georgia Tech's commitment to sustainability. And I believe that it is, you've alluded to this some, is impacting the state of practice in both design and construction. And so in that regard, it's really fulfilling the mission that the Candida Fund had in mind. So let me encourage everyone who's watched this to, we'll put a link in where people can go and get a virtual tour of the building, but that's not really the same as going in person. So come on down and visit the Candida building. I think you will be blown away.